Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander First Impressions, the series where I give my mostly blind reactions to upcoming Commander Precons. My name is Grazzet, and as usual, we have my ever-optimistic co-host Kaprak joining us to provide the Precon and its contents to me, as well as to provide his evaluation as well. How are we doing today, sir?
Honestly, it's a pretty good day, and we got a whole other suite of Commander decks ahead of us, so let's just get right into them, right?
Yep. Which one are we looking at today?
We're going to start off with the Bant one, Peace Offering. And here's the deck box.
Okay, so we're looking at let's see here, Group Hug, +1/+1 counter deck. Well, they're just giving us archetypes right on the box these days, huh?
Yep. Hey, at least you know what you're getting.
Sure. But yeah, so +1/+1 counters, these colors tend to be fairly good with this, and with their easy access to proliferate and +1/+1 counter distribution. And Group Hug, we're in white and blue, which have a lot of that too. So yeah, these colors seem to be in a good spot to be able to use both of these archetypes. We're just going to have to see if they can implement them together successfully, because Group Hug is decisive generally at the table.
I believe you mean divisive.
Yep, divisive, my mistake.
I'm a big fan. I like quote-unquote political game of Commander.
I like this being more efficient than putting agency in your opponent's decks, but that's just me.
Very fair. I believe you've seen all the face commanders, but we're just going to start off with Mrs. Bumbleflower. For 1 Bant, you get a 1/5 legendary Rabbit Citizen with Vigilance. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. Then you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains flying until end of turn. And if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards.
Alright, so for 5 mana, we're getting a 1/5. Not the best stats here, that's really low power. Vigilance kind of sort of makes up for it, but generally are going to be attacking with a 1/5, I think not. But her abilities are interesting. The mandatory give your opponent resources I'm not a fan of here.
But you get to choose which opponent.
Yeah, you get to choose the person in the worst spot here, I suppose. But then you get to put a counter on target creature. Now, noticeably that says target creature, not your creature. So you can just put this on an opponent's creature and give it flying until the end of the turn. And because this is not limited to during your turn, you can do this as kind of a combat trick, both for yourself and for an opponent. If you need to give an opponent a flying blocker, for example, if you need them to block something in the air that's not attacking you. And yeah, the ability to then give yourself card advantage by just casting spells is fine, but it's not really a cantrip because you spent 2 to draw 1, so...
No, you draw 2.
If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw... Oh, okay, yeah, you draw 2 cards, that's fair. So you do remain card neutral, so it's not really card advantage, it's more of a cantrip. Okay, I mean, I'm not a huge fan. I don't like giving opponents resources, but then again, this entire premise of the deck seems to be Group Hug, and Group Hug tends to do that a lot, so the ability itself does distribute +1/+1 counters.
And to be frank, you always have a target on your side of the board for the counters.
Yes, you do.
Because a 1/5 with Vigilance starts getting better once you start piling counters on it.
Yeah, 2/6, get the swing in, she stays up to block. It's not bad.
And it gets evasion, so...
Yeah, you can give her evasion on your turn to bypass blockers, and then make her flying to block flying attackers. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I'm not the most impressed here with her, but then again, I'm not the biggest fan of Group Hug decks, so that's me being biased.
Yes. She's interesting. Like, there's definitely some cool stuff going on here, though it's very simple. It's not a threatening command, which I think is helpful for Group Hug decks, because frequently they feel like they're a little like, wow, that accrues so much value that I can't let it stick around.
What, Feldergriff?
I was thinking more Zedru or K&T.
True. This seems a lot more tame in comparison to them, if anything.
Yes. Though, I have a feeling this might also get out of hand.
I mean, it depends on how many spells you're able to cast per turn, right? You'd have to be able to reliably cast at least 2 spells per rotation.
Yeah.
Or no, per turn, not even per rotation. So if you want to get the quote-unquote maximum value out of her, you would have to be casting 8 spells per rotation.
Well, yeah, but also there's a certain point at which you just get so many +1/+1 counters from it that it doesn't matter how much value you're getting. Your whole board's big.
True. Well, yeah, like I said, not the biggest fan, but again, it's because I'm not the biggest Group Hug aficionado at the table, so yeah. But we'll just have to see what the alternate commander brings to see if they're a better fit for the face or not.
Well, I think you'll like the alternate commander a little bit more, because while he's not full-on Group Hug, he kind of encourages it, but he still isn't. And that gives us Mr. Foxglove, who for 2 and a Bant, you get a 3/5 legendary Fox Rogue with lifelink that says whenever he attacks, draw cards equal to the number of cards in defending player's hand minus the number of cards in your hand. If you didn't draw cards this way, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield.
Okay, so for 5 mana, a little bit more expensive than the Face Commander, you're getting a 3/5 with lifelink. A little bit better stats, but still understated. But in contrast to the Face Commander, we're getting a very reliable source of draw that doesn't really give your opponent any resources.
Absolutely none.
It incentivizes you to be as hellbent as possible when Mr. Foxglove attacks, right?
Kind of.
Or alternatively, if you're not hellbent, you get to just cast free creatures, which is arguably more powerful.
Yes. Well, to be clear, it's not cast. You don't get cast triggers off this.
True. You still get all the ETB triggers, but you don't get cast triggers off of this. That's true.
You just get to put big dumb idiots directly into play, which means they can't be countered.
So the fact that he's a source of reliable card advantage when you're low on cards and just a means to get free value when you're up on cards makes him fairly good in my opinion. But at the end of the day, he's still a 3/5 lifelink, right?
Yeah.
How often can he swing in reliably to proc either one of these effects?
Being a 3/5, he should be able to probably swing in at some opponents in the early game. We are in green. You can probably ramp him out on like turn, 4. Get that attack in on turn 5, and somebody might not want to gang block and lose their ramp creatures to kill him, and you still get the cards.
True, but then in the mid to late game, he starts getting worse, right?
Yeah, but that's the period where A, you don't necessarily care about getting the damage in. You're just attacking to draw 6 cards. B, you've drawn so many cards where you're just attacking to put a Crater Hoof into play as an attack trigger. Or lastly, this is also a +1/+1 counter deck.
Yeah, the fact that he is in the 99 of a +1/+1 counter deck makes him better because you are going to be able to grow him. Well, at least theoretically, you'll be able to grow him depending on how many sources of +1/+1 counters this deck has. And that in turn makes the lifelink better, that in turn makes him more reliable to get into survive combat. So yeah, he looks good in the 99 for this deck, just on the archetypes that we know it's trying to go for, but we're just going to have to see how well that fits in comparison with the rest of the deck.
And I do think my second point there is really important. This is an attack trigger, so if you drop an ETB creature that would now do something to affect combat math, that comes before blocks, that you get whatever you need to make Mr. Foxglove better.
True. So if you have some big AoE pump effect, Crater Hoof is the example you provided, yes, you can quote-unquote flash B to drop Crater Hoof.
Just something that gives him unblockable.
Yeah, true.
You can just make it real simple.
True. But you want to take this, to 11 if at all possible. So gigantic things, degenerate things is the key here.
But those being the face commanders, I think we should move on to the rest of the new cards in the deck.
Yeah, let's see what we got.
But yeah, with the new cards, let's just start out the same way as always, more or less going in type and mana value order. First thing we've got on the plate is Bloodroot Apothecary. For 2 and a green, you get a 3/3 Squirrel Druid. It has Toxic 2. When Bloodroot Apothecary enters, you and target opponent each create a treasure token. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-creature token, that player gets 2 poison counters.
All right, so we're evidently not just caring about +1/+1 counters in this deck with Toxic 2 on this little friend here, which can get really out of hand depending on how many sources of Proliferate we got, but on the face of it, we're getting a 3/3 for 3, which is good. Toxic 2, relevant keywords, sure. ETB effect ramps you, also ramps an opponent, but is that worth it? Maybe, depending on how many times we can flicker this friend, because you keep getting the token and you can just distribute the treasure to somebody else every time.
Or you can just keep giving it to the same person, because how badly are they going to want to crack their treasures with this on the battlefield?
True, because whenever they crack the treasures, they get the 2 poison counters, so it's kind of a bad gift that you're giving them. Now, to be fair, this is a 3/3 that they can bolt or waste a kill spell on and get usability out of those treasures without any downsides, but then again, you're wasting a kill spell on a 3/3, so, trade-off there. But yeah, he's fine. While group hug oriented, I like this one because it is giving your opponents resources, but forcing them to take a downside in order to use said resources, which is what I want to see. This is here, have a resource, but if you use it, you're going to die fast. And I can kill you.
I am so happy to see some treasure hate. Especially treasure hate that's not just, I destroy your treasure. This is hey, you got 5. Use them wisely. Well, 4.
Yeah, they're just going to use them all on the stack, though, if you drop this.
Well, yeah, but then you need something instant speed to kill you, because If I crack 25 treasures and get 25 triggers on the stack, you kill the Bloodroot Apothecary, that's still 50 poison.
It's true. But yeah, your opponent's just not going to crack treasures to this because they know it is a moot point.
It shuts some decks down.
Yeah, and it shuts down cards that are notoriously good. Extortionist looks a lot worse when this is on the board.
Also, low-key, it's also a little like, hey, blood, maps, clues. Well, let's hate on those just a little bit too. Like, this takes Get Lost from a good spell to a better spell.
True. This one's fine for the archetype that it's trying to be in.
I think it's just low-key a fine card, and it's probably going to find its way into a bunch of mono-green decks. Moving on, our next new card is 20-Toed Toad. Love this set. For 3 and a blue, you get a 3/3 Frog Wizard. Your maximum hand size is 20. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on 20-Toed Toad and draw a card. Whenever 20-Toed Toad attacks, you win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it, or you have 20 or more cards in hand.
Okay, so for 4 mana you're getting a 3/3, below average stats for the cost. Increasing your maximum hand size to 20 is effectively just getting rid of your hand size at that point.
Kind of. We live in a post-Tameo world.
Nah, true. But we're looking at him being able to put +1/+1 counters on himself relatively easily. He swings in with a friend, and he gets a +1/+1 counter and draws you a card.
He does not have to swing it.
True, but he can proc himself as one of the two. He doesn't have to,
Yes.
but he can. And then if you just have a bunch of tokens, for example, and you don't want to risk him because you don't have good attacks, you can just attack with 2 expendable bodies or evasive bodies. He still gets the counter and gets to draw you a card, which is great. We're in colors that can go wide relatively easily. And +1/+1 counter decks like to go wide anyway because most of their effects are AoE counter distribution. And then he becomes a win condition for the deck. If you get him big enough, he just wins. Or if you have 20 cards in hand, you win. Which we're in blue, can draw a lot of cards. Theoretically, this guy can get the job done on multiple archetypes fronts. And I like that. The fact that you can put him in a +1/+1 counter deck. You can put him in a draw-focused deck. It doesn't even have to be a +1/+1 counters. It can be any types of counters, right? He just needs to have 20 counters.
If you get 20 flying counters on him, I don't know, man.
I mean, there's cards, I think, that just grab all the counters on board and put them on one target, right?
Maybe. I'm just thinking of ridiculous proliferate shenanigans where you just get 1 flying counter on him and then just proliferate it 19 times.
It's true. I mean, your opponents are probably going to deal with him well before that becomes a problem.
Yeah, but we're in blue.
The world of counterspells, the world of spell disruption, so good luck with that. Also, just making your boy really hard to be targeted.
Give him indestructible, give him hexproof. Honestly, phase him out. Phase him out.
Yeah, this guy looks good. I enjoy the fact that he works in multiple archetypes. He provides consistent card advantage that's easy to proc. He fits with the +1/+1 counter-oriented direction of this deck. And he's a win con for the archetype. So yeah, there's no downside to run him.
I like the name.
You're a simple man.
It's a fun name to say.
20-Toed Toad.
Yeah.
It is fun to say.
It's got nice alliteration. Well, staying on theme, but looking to another frog with a fun name, we have Octomancer. For 3 in Simic, you get a 3/3 Frog Druid with the line of text, Gift an Octopus, which says you may promise an opponent a gift as you cast this spell. If you do, as this enters, they create an 8/8 blue octopus creature token. And at the beginning of each end step, create a token that's a copy of target creature token that entered the battlefield this turn.
Woof. Okay, so for 5 mana, we're getting a 3/3. Not the best stats. And you have to give your opponent an 8/8. Okay, you don't have to, but you generally want to in order to be able to proc that second ability, which will get you an 8/8, and then keep giving you tokens so long as you keep having tokens enter the battlefield, or anybody has tokens constantly entering the battlefield.
Creature tokens specifically, so you can't, like, jack a treasure.
True. But it's still pretty good, because we do have a lot of creatures that just make copies of themselves. I mean, if push comes to shove and you have ways to flicker this guy, you can just keep giving, 8/8s to a different person and then keep getting an 8/8 for yourself.
Gifting is a cast trigger.
Okay, so fair. You'd actually have to bounce him and then recast him, which makes it worse.
Mind you, once you have bounce, that's when you're... I think it's in the main set, the cards that let you bounce one of your things and one of your opponent's things. Well, you bounce your Octomancer and their octopus.
Yeah, then they don't get to keep the 8/8 and you get to retrigger the Octomancer. This is run away together.
Yes, that's what I thought it was. Mind you, this is, much like the squirrel at the start, kind of just a general hoser. This says, hey, token decks, you better be creating really small, useless tokens, or else I get them too.
Well, yeah, but this doesn't have to be your opponent's stuff that it targets. Like if you have a giant Adaphage, for example, which can get tokens of itself real easy into play, this is just another giant Adaphage token.
Yes, that is another giant Adaphage token on your turn, but on your opponent's turns, unless you have instant speed token creation, it's their best token.
True, because it is each end step, so yeah, that's true. This is kind of sort of a hoser for token-based decks. It's not bad. I'm not seeing why it's in here specifically.
What's Group Hug?
Well, fair, but it's still giving your opponent an 8/8, and without other ways to enable its effect outside of that, if we have lots of ways to create big tokens, again, that's dependent on the rest of the 99. I don't know what that is yet. I'm hesitant to say it stays in here unless we have ways to create big tokens ourselves.
Or give other people some tokens.
If we have ways to give other people tokens passively on their turn, then maybe this gets better, because we then get a copy of that token too.
Well, speaking of ways to give other people tokens, what might be for many people one of the best card names in the set. Tempt with Bunnies. For 2 and a white, this is a tempting offer sorcery. You draw a card and create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. Then each opponent may draw a card and create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. And for each opponent who does, you can draw a card and create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token.
Okay, for the record, I do not like the tempt cards.
I know. They don't.
And in this particular case, I still don't like this card, because this, if your opponents played this correctly, this is a 3-mana cantrip that gets you a 1/1. Nobody should be taking this deal.
But who's going to say no to a bunny?
I would say no to a bunny.
That's because you have no heart.
That may be true, but this card is still bad. This is a 3-mana cantrip. That's the floor. It is a 3-mana cantrip that gets you a 1/1. That's pretty bad.
This is a mono-white card that draws you 4 cards.
Theoretically draws you 4 cards.
This might be one of the better tempting offer cards, because what it gives the other players is so little.
Which incentivizes them not to take it.
But it's enough that they'll probably take it. Because it's still a card.
I don't know. I don't like this one. I just don't like this one. I don't like the tempting offers, and this doesn't give you enough on the bottom end to warrant its inclusion, in my opinion.
That's fair. It is an extra mana for a sorcery version of a Faithful Companion, or
True.
Whatever the 2-mana 1/1 that draws you a card is.
Yeah, I'm just not a fan. I'm not a fan, but then again, I'm biased, so.
Yeah, I know you don't like bunnies. We get it.
I don't like tempting cards.
So, moving on to more cards that give your opponents things. We have Perch Protection. 4 white gets you an instant that reads, Gift an extra turn.
Wow.
You can give someone an extra turn.
That better win you the game. That better read, at the end of that turn, you win the game.
So, what this does is create 4 2/2 blue bird creature tokens with flying. So it's 6 mana for 8/8 worth of stats has flying. If the gift was promised, all permanents you control phase out, and until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything. So it's Teferi's Protection.
It's Teferi's Protection that costs a lot more.
And Exile Perch Protection, so you can't start recurring this thing.
Okay.
It's Teferi's Protection that costs a lot more, but it does give you 8/8 worth of flying stats before phasing you out.
And notably, it's instant speed. So it phases you out immediately. It keeps you phased out during your opponent's extra turn.
Yes, that extra turn doesn't matter as much if you don't exist.
Yeah. This is Teferi's Protection. That's the big thing. It doesn't matter how much it costs. It doesn't matter what else riders it may have. At the end of the day, this is going to keep your sorry ass alive. For 6 mana, 6 mana is the downside. I previously said the mana cost doesn't matter, but 6 mana is a lot to keep up. It really is.
This is a green deck.
That's true. You're going to be able to ramp hard. You're going to have a lot of mana. Makes this easier. Gifting the extra turn could actually be to your advantage here. Give this to the person with the best position at the table. Have them take care of your opponents for you, and then you mop up after if you have the ability to do so.
Yeah. Teferi's Protection. Better in the 1v1 at the end of the game, because there's just 2 of you.
Yeah.
This at the end of the game, they get 2 consecutive turns. They can draw more cards, prepare for when you get to come back.
Yeah, it's true.
This in the mid-game, when there are still 3 other players at the table, and everyone's jockeying for position, this is better than Teferi's Protection, because they're going to get distracted by the guy who got an extra turn.
Yeah, but you just got 8/8 worth of stats in the air, so, you're still
Yeah, but
dangerous.
it doesn't exist. It's phased out. Please ignore it. Just put a second playmat over your board, because you don't exist. They'll forget about the 8/8.
Okay, I believe you're under the assumption that Commander players are goldfish.
Yes, many of them are.
They just can't, evaluate threat assessment.
What have you done for me lately is, the backbone.
That's fair. I do like this card. Despite the caveat of giving an opponent an extra turn, the upside on this can be huge, keeping you alive.
You do not have to give someone the extra turn. You can just end of someone's turn, make 8/8 worth of stats for 6, and kill them.
Yeah, but that's not great. Unless you have lethal on the board and you're going to surprise lethal somebody, you're generally going to wait until you can Teferi's Protection with this.
Yeah, you are correct. But this does have the second mode of, it's just a dragon.
Yeah, surprise 8/8 in the air on your end phase that I have pseudo haste with and then can just kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, worst case scenario, honestly, but you'll take it. You'll take the win.
Sometimes that wins you a game.
Yeah, you'll just take it. We take those.
Well, up next, we're going to start moving into some of the enchantments in this deck. First of which is this one, Communal Brewing. For 2 and a green, you get the enchantment that says whenever Communal Brewing enters, any number of target opponents each draw a card. And you put an ingredient counter on Communal Brewing, and then an additional counter on it for each card drawn this one. Whenever you cast a creature spell, that creature enters with X additional +1/+1 counters on it, or X is the number of ingredient counters on Communal Brewing.
Okay, so for 3 mana, you're giving presumably your 3 other opponents an extra card.
Yes.
And then, moving forward, each one of your creatures comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it.
4. So it starts with 1 ingredient counter.
Okay, true.
So if nobody draws a card, all of your creatures that you cast, specifically, that is cast, so it's not token, get a +1/+1 counter. And then for each other player who draws a card, this does not draw you a card. That'll be 2, 3, or 4 +1/+1 counters on every creature spell you cast.
Yeah, your opponents don't have a choice in this case. If you select them, they have to draw the card.
Yeah, but you don't have to give it to them.
True. But generally, if you want to make this as powerful as possible, so your creatures come into play with +4/+4 worth of stats as you cast them, you're going to do it.
Yes.
Is that worth it? That is a lot of stats.
This is a deck that cares heavily about casting creature spells, and from the sounds of it, a large number of smaller creature spells.
Well, casting spells. If we're talking about the face commander, she cares about us just casting spells.
Fair, but also, this now says that, hey, you want to cast smaller creature spells. All of your mana dorks are now like 4/5s or 5/5s.
Yeah, makes sense. It sucks that you can't give this to tokens, but I can see why. Just because that can get out of hand real quick. But yeah, overall, this one's not bad. The downside's tolerable, I suppose. Giving your opponents a card in order to make all your creatures significantly larger as you cast them may be worth it. I'll have to play around with this one for final judgment, but at face value, 3 mana is low enough that you can still theoretically play a 1 to 2 drop creature with and have it come down as a 5/5, 6/6 reasonably well.
Honestly, in a good green deck, you can probably comfortably drop this on turn 2.
Yeah, but you're probably still ramping at that point. But honestly, yeah, I can see this being a good inclusion in a +1/+1 counter-centric deck, so long as, you're not adverse to giving your opponents resources. Most players are, but even I would say, maybe that's a bit too much, but we're in group hug specifically in this deck, so we may as well lean into it.
I knew I missed a card. I must have double-clicked when I was closing out of a page. We'll just keep this in line as it is, but I did skip over a creature. Let's go back and look at Steelburr Champion. 2 and a white get you a 1/1 Mouse Soldier. With Offspring, for 1 and a white, which, so we haven't spoken about Offspring before, when you cast this card, you can pay what is functionally a kicker to get an additional 1/1 copy of this card. Given this card is already a 1/1, it's just a copy of the card. Just a token. This has Vigilance, and whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on it.
Okay, so for 3 mana, you're getting a 1/1 with Vigilance. Not the best stat block, not the best keyword to have on a 1/1. You can get an extra copy of it if you're casting this for 5, so 5 mana gets you 2/2 worth of stats across 2 bodies. And then the passive ability, which theoretically can grow this and its offspring pretty quickly. Is it fast enough? I don't know. What do you think?
There are tables where this is going to get out of hand because it's just going to eat into mana rocks and card draw and removal on things that people are like, oh, that's more important than this. It's just a 4/4. Okay, now it's just a 7/7.
Well, yeah, I can see the argument here that if you're on a table that somebody's playing cantrips, for example, they're just going to make this thing gigantic and its offspring in turn gigantic. But at the end of the day, this is just a dumb beater, right? This has no way of getting in for damage reliably under its own power.
It's cheap and defensive. Those are its benefits.
I can see this getting real out of hand, but again, we have to keep in mind that this is also in the same deck as the Face Commander, which can give things evasion on demand.
Yes, that is also true.
yes, this becomes a lot better in the 99 of her deck specifically, because being able to make this thing evasive, both on our and our opponent's turns, makes it a lot more dangerous.
And you are handing out cards like candy.
So, yeah, theoretically, while I'm not a big fan of this card in a vacuum, if we were just evaluating it under its own merit, the fact that it's in the 99 of a deck that can reliably give it evasion makes it better.
Okie dokie here. Back to our enchantments, we have, well, I didn't expect to see classes in this set. So we've got Fisher's Talent. For 2 in Simic, you get a class. The static ability on this one is, at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library. You may reveal it if it's a land card. And then you create a 1/1 blue fish creature token if you reveal it this way, then draw a card. If you pay a Simic again to level it up, it now says if you would create a fish token, create a 3/3 blue shark creature token instead. Then if you pay 2 in a Simic to level it up again, it says if you would create a shark token, create an 8/8 blue octopus creature token instead.
Okay, so this is a token creating card here.
This also draws you an extra card a turn.
I mean, with the caveat that you need to reveal a land off the top.
You have to reveal lands if you want creature tokens, but again, this still just draws you a card.
Well, does it? At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal it if it's a land card created. Yeah, you're right, then draw a card. So yeah, you may reveal it if it's a land. You don't have to if you don't want the token, but you still get to draw the card.
And honestly, why wouldn't you want the token?
It's true. You're just giving your opponent the knowledge that you drew a land.
But they don't know your other draw for the turn.
Yeah. So yeah, sure. It still draws you a card passively, which is fine. Well, I mean, maybe a little inefficient in the fact that we're in Simic and we have better draw options at 4, but the fact is you are getting a 1/1 occasionally, which eventually turns into a 3/3, which eventually turns into an 8/8, depending on how much mana we're willing to pump into this. Is it the most exciting thing in the world? No. It's passive card advantage that you don't have to worry about, that just gives you an extra card, occasionally gives you more board presence. You're probably going to just cast this if you're running it and leave it at the level 1, unless you really have ways to stack your deck and put lands on top to reliably proc this, because otherwise you're just going to get a token 1 every 3 turns on average.
I will say that there's a lot of scry in the color pairing that this is, so
Yeah.
Probably.
If you have ways to put lands on top of your deck, or manipulate your deck so that you can put lands on top that way, or any sort of shenanigans in that vein.
Brilliant idea. We can add Sensei's Divining Top so we can get Octopus.
Exactly. Sensei's Divining Top for the free Octopus. That is the least broken way to use Sensei's Divining Top, by the way. But yes, in this case, I can see merit here in a more lands-focused deck that can manipulate the lands to put them on top in order to, get them reliably there so we can constantly hit that token creation. But otherwise, I don't know if this is good enough.
I think it's got a nice home just because it's so much little incremental advantage, but I understand if it doesn't see the final cut. That's all 10 of the new cards. So up next we have the reprints that I've seen that have enough value to talk about. So we're back to a mainline precon as compared to the fancy precons for Modern Horizons 3. So the reprint value is not bad, but it's not as good as we saw with previous 4.
Hopefully the price reflects that, because those other ones, depending on which one we were talking about, price gouging is an understatement.
I'm pretty sure these are reasonable, but there's a lot of $1.50 cards in this deck. There's a lot of little things that are like, oh, that's neat, but nothing to write home about. My personal honorable mention, the one that I saw on the list of, oh, that's neat, Mangara the Diplomat.
Okay, Mangara's back. He's seen a lot of reprints recently, hasn't he?
Enough. Commander Masters.
Yeah, that brought him down to sub $2, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he's currently sub $2, but close to 2.
Yeah. Mangara is a good mono-white commander, just because he kind of falls in that whole, if I'm behind, if your opponents are doing well, you'll do better. That whole aspect of playing from behind, which Mangara kind of epitomizes in this particular incarnation. So yeah, he's fine. He's a good piece of value. Stick him on the board and get more value as your opponents just play the game if they decide to attack you, or just play spells.
Yeah, no, it's a card that punishes your opponents for doing too much in a deck that's giving your opponents a bunch of stuff to do.
Yeah, makes sense in the 99 of this deck.
Up next, I'm rounding up ever so slightly to get this one on here, Wizard class.
Yeah, Wizard class, more draw matters, shenanigans. No maximum hand size for 1's pretty good. Getting just regular card advantage for 3, so that's just a standard pay 3, draw 2. You'll pay it just for the card advantage. And then weaponizing all that draw into more +1/+1 counter distribution is pretty good for a deck that wants to be spreading those +1/+1 counters around. especially because you get to draw 2 off of the face commander if you're able to cast 2 spells. So, yeah, this is pretty good here. But again, this one's been reprinted enough that it's reasonable just to be able to buy it on the market.
Fun fact, this is the first actual reprint of this.
Has it?
It's on the list.
Okay, so it got a list reprint. Okay, fair. Yeah, this card, either that or it's never really spiked in price.
It's always been just good enough to be a couple of bucks, but not enough to be expensive.
Yeah, for 5 mana, there's better stuff to do that you can weaponize and win the game off of, like Psychosis Crawler, for example, who can just win you the game and not have to go through other hoops to do it.
So, slowly cascading up in price, we have a card I forgot existed, Intellectual Offering.
Alright, Intellectual Offering. 5 mana to have an opponent draw 3 while you draw 3, and then the important one, which is untap all non-land permanents for you and an opponent of your choice, which is generally the reason you're playing this card, right?
Yeah, either weird mana rock-based ramp shenanigans, or just blowing somebody out in combat.
Yeah, the question is, does this particular deck have enough to warrant this inclusion? Because generally the decks that want to run Intellectual Offering want to abuse that ability as much as possible.
Yeah, but this is still group hug.
Yeah, I mean, that's the argument here, right? It's symmetrical, so you're going to run it because it's symmetrical. This is a good card, don't get me wrong. It's a good card in the decks that want to have it, but I'm not sure if it's going to keep its spot here, just because I don't know if there's enough cards in this deck that can take advantage of that second ability, which, honestly, we haven't seen so far.
Yeah, but we haven't looked at the core of the deck yet, to be fair.
True. See if we've got anything good on the high reprint side here that could make this better.
Who said we're getting to the high reprint side?
Okay, so we're still on honorable mentions here?
No, these aren't honorable mentions, but these are like $2-3. Again, there's a lot of, okay, that card would cost me, McDonald's hamburger level cards, which those add up.
Okay, got it. This deck's worthless.
No, it's actually got decent value, just not in big, high-value cards that have never been reprinted. Because next we've got Feyburrow Elder.
The mana dork that taps for 3.
Yeah.
I mean, what else do you want from me? Also is a potentially a 3/3?
Yeah. Hey, you wanted a card that worked well with Intellectual Offering, and it was next.
Okay, that's true. I can't really fault you for bringing that up. But yeah, this is a mana dork. Do we want a mana dork in this particular deck? Maybe. It's a creature. Get +1/+1 counters on it. Swing for the fences. Sure.
Plus, more vigilance. A lot of this deck is vigilant, I've noticed.
Which gets better with +1/+1 counter distribution.
Keeping on that theme, we've got Lauren.
This is actually worth something. She's a 5er, isn't she? Or did she get reprinted into Oblivion too?
Reprinted in the Karlov Commander deck, and under 3 now.
Well, okay, that's fortunate for budget players, because she's a really good card.
Congratulations. At this point, we're probably going to be looking at $1 or less.
Yeah, Lauren was ridiculously overpriced for a very long time. And the fact that she's a ETB, pop back row, and then a source of repeatable draw, and it also fits in this deck because, again, we are group huggy, so you do get to give your opponent a resource, you get a resource, she's repeatable, and yeah, she's a good include. I really can't complain about this one.
Yeah, it's a solid card, and hey, it's a group hug piece.
Cannot complain about that.
Moving on, we've got another card that I think is going to make you tear your hair out. It is Tempt with Discovery.
Get it out. Just get it out.
This gets you 4 lands.
This gets you 1 land. The caveat here being that it fetches you any land from your deck. This is the only thing that saves this card, and you can make the argument, okay, I'm paying 4, but I can get any land. No, you're getting 1 land. Let's be honest.
You're getting 4 lands.
You're
if you cast this spell, you're probably getting...
No, if your opponents have half a brain, they would not take this because you're paying 4 for a rampant growth. Okay, you're not quite, but... Maybe
your opponents want to get their Cabal Coffers, or some other absolutely insane land that they can now tutor up.
Yes, that is a problem. If you've given your opponent a Cabal Coffers, I don't know what table you're playing on, but this precon does not belong on it. I don't like tempt cards. I've gone on the record, and this is probably the best one. I would argue that you'd run this just to get any land from your deck into play, right? If you've got a good land base, and you've got a particularly good utility land that you need to bring into play that synergizes with your deck, you'll probably run this. Just because if your opponents are, quote-unquote, dumb enough to take you up on this offer, you're just going to get more upside.
Or they can take advantage of it.
It's true. Maybe you are doing them a favor and you've shot yourself in the foot, which makes this card still bad. I don't like tempt cards.
I know. Well, speaking of offers, we've got another one.
Please no.
No, this one's just an offer you can't refuse.
Okay, this one's good. It is a swan song, kind of. Better swan song because it counters any non-creature spell And your opponents do get 2 treasures, but you're going to give them 2 treasures if this prevents them from winning the game.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a good card. Good reprint. I want to see more of this because this card is way too expensive and has been for a while.
This is what I like to think of as the first, actual, nice mid-range reprint, because I think it was $5 before this.
Yeah, it hovers around there.
But it's already dropped below 4, and it's probably going to go further.
Yeah, I want to see this around, counter spell territory of price, which hovers around $1. And then Arcane Denial, which gets under $1 for a bit once it gets reprinted, then spikes back up to $3 after a year.
Moving on, we have the next mid-range reprint, the Solid card. I think this is the first real reprint that we've had for it. Tameo, Field Researcher.
Okay, I'm going to need a refresher on what she does because honestly, I can't remember even what she does. So 4 mana gets you a 4 walker. Choose up to 2 target creatures until your next turn. Either of those creatures deals combat damage. You draw a card. Okay, so more card advantage. We're in a deck that can easily make creatures evasive, so that's just reliable card advantage here. Tap up to 2 target non-land permanents. They do not tap during their controller's next untap step, so this is just stun without the counters. -7, draw 3 cards. You get an emblem. You may cast non-land cards from your hand without paying their mana costs. Walkers are generally good in counter-oriented decks because of the amount of proliferate they generally have to make use of that. Problem is I have not seen any proliferate so far.
Fair.
Now, a lot of proliferation pieces are cheap.
Yes.
So maybe we're going to see them in the 99, and that makes her better. But again, at face value, you know what? Actually, at face value, she's still pretty good.
That +1 draws you 2 cards.
Yeah, it synergizes very well with the face commander because so long as you're casting 2 spells on your turn, you're going to be able to draw 2 cards off of her, right? And then the tap down can occasionally prevent your opponents from swinging in or making use of tap effects that are not their lands. The -7 is not backbreaking, but it can generate you a lot of value, making theoretically the rest of your deck backbreaking. So, yeah, I mean, she fits here, maybe more on the +1/+1 counter-oriented side just because of the proliferate pieces that we probably have access to and not so much on the group hug side, but I can still see keeping her in just because she does provide a decent amount of value.
And then we have one nice heavy hitter. One real big reprint.
It's Craterhoof.
Nope, I wish.
Please?
No.
Let it be Craterhoof?
No, it's a +1/+1 counters deck. It's Colonian Hydra.
Didn't this get reprinted recently?
March of the Machine Commander.
So 5 mana. Yeah, so this is just, it gets bigger forever, right? So long as it keeps swinging, it keeps getting exponentially larger, and it's just a big green idiot with +1/+1 counters on it, so it goes in the deck.
But you can give it
Evasion. It's got Trample.
Yeah, but Flying and Trample is even better.
Flample? The legendary Flample? Overkill, kind of. But this is a 5-drop that swings as an 8/8. And then is a 16/16, and then a 32/32. And then by that point, your opponents have either scooped or have killed it. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad include. It's really not. But at the end of the day, it is a big, dumb beat stick. But sometimes you need closers, so you'll take it.
Yeah. And again, while there aren't a bunch of super high value reprints in this deck, there's still a bunch of real solid $1 to $2 cards in here.
I can't help but notice, though, that there is one +1/+1 counter-centric card that would have made a superb reprint that would also provide card advantage and ramp and life gain and all this good stuff that would make sense with creatures constantly getting bigger.
Yeah, but I don't think this deck is about having big creatures. They just have incidental big creatures, so I don't think it would be as good as you think it is. And that's all we need to say.
No. Reprint the Great Henge, you cowards. Reprint the Great Henge in a precon. Do it. This is never going to happen, is it?
I hope not.
You got to keep the bit going.
Well, that's all of the reprints, so let's let you take a look at the whole deck.
Yeah, we'll take a moment here to take a look at the entire deck list, both myself and Kaprak, and then we'll be back momentarily to give our thoughts on the rest of the 99 we haven't covered already.
Okay, so we've taken a little bit of time for you to look at the rest of the deck. Do you have any significant opinions? Anything that really stands out to you? Anything that doesn't make sense? What do you think about the mana base?
Yeah, well, I do have opinions. Starting with the land base here. I'm actually pretty impressed with the mana base here. We have all the Pain lands. Adakar Waste, Brushland, Yavimaya Coast. Brushland needed a reprint, so that's nice to see. Czech lands, Hinterland Harbor, Glacial Fortress, Sunpetal Grove, again all 3. Sunpetal Grove again needing a reprint, so that's nice to see it in here to bring that price down. Plus some of the battle lands and filter lands to give us more consistent fixing for a 3-color deck, so I am really liking the fact that we have that consistent fixing here to make the deck as smooth as possible, at least in the mana base department. What do you think?
There are a lot of tap lands, but there's only 4 forests, 4 islands, and 4 plains, so it's doing something right.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of basics in here. Yeah, we've got a lot of fixing. Maybe some of these taplins can go just to make the deck a bit faster, but yeah, overall I like this.
I do think the deck has benefited from the fact that it is partially Simic, and there have been so many decent Simic decks printed over the last couple of years, going back to Lord of the Rings and Doctor Who, and just recently even the one in Modern Horizons 3. So Simic mana bases are getting printed at a slightly faster rate than everything else, so the prices are going down at a slightly faster rate than everything else.
Yeah, which budget players appreciate because, previously, if we had this conversation a few years ago, pain lands and check lands would be out of the question. Now, we can reasonably get these within budget for very cheap. Then moving on to the rest of the deck, which I'll start off with the good cards because I've got opinions here. Yeah, overall, on the group hug side of things, we've got the standard Rites of Flourishing, Gura per Ori to get the extra symmetrical land drops, a Sylvala Explorer Return because you want to give your opponent resources and get value yourself and still give yourself resources. So yeah, the usual suspects here when it comes to group hug. Are there any that you think I missed here that are notable?
I do like some of the new cards from the set. They're not going to blow you away, but I think they synergize just enough.
Like Wear and Tear, which is a pop 2 if you give your opponent a card.
Wear Down.
Yeah, Wear Down, you're right.
I like Peerless Recycling.
Which you give your opponent a card in order to get 2 things back from your bins. Has to be permanence.
It's permanence only, yeah. You can't go real crazy, but this deck's an Eternal Witness away from going, well, I'm gonna Peerless Recycling back my Ewit and something else, and then Ewit back my Peerless Recycling, and just start so much little incremental value.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, I like it when the return cards get 2 and can also still be targeted by some of the permanent-based return cards.
Yeah, that's true. Long Reverse Pull, which I didn't see either, which is just counterspell with the gift mechanic.
Yeah, it's counterspell in this deck.
Yeah, which if you don't want to give your opponent something, you can just counter one of their creatures, but if you do, you get to counter anything. So, it fits here. So overall, it's not as group huggy as I expected it to be, but it's got enough pieces in here. On the +1/+1 counter side of things, which I'm surprised it has as little +1/+1 counters as it does. Forgotten Ancient obviously is a +1/+1 counter all-star, gets those counters everywhere as your opponents cast spells, and we're going to be giving them resources, so they're going to be casting those more often. Same with Mana Gorger Hydra and Sunscorch Regent, which again just get better as our opponents just cast their spells, and because we are giving our opponents resources with our face commander, they're going to be casting more spells, making them all better. But the thing I'm not seeing here is a lot of ways to just distribute a lot of counters to our creatures in general. Outside of our face commander, that is, and Forgotten Ancient, I'm not really seeing a lot of +1/+1 counter distribution apart from creatures who can put counters on themselves.
Yeah, I think the deck relies on the commander to throw counters out and make things evasive and hidden with big guys. The deck seems like it's the middle point between being a spell slinger deck, but not, because it just wants to throw around a few cheap spells, make its things big, get attacks in, and then just keep doing that. Little incremental value.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I think it could stand for a bit more +1/+1 counter distribution, but what I didn't expect was the draw sub-theme that going over the 99 brought to light here, because we have Body of Knowledge, Triska Decaphile, Joriel, Mulvani Recluse, Chasm Skulker, Psychosis Crawler. These are all cards that either let us draw cards or get better as we draw cards. And granted, our commander does provide card advantage to let us draw 2, but I wasn't expected to go this hard on card draw.
Well, it does have 2 alternate win cons for card draw.
Yeah, it's true. Triska Decaphile and the Toad that you're fond of.
Yeah, 13 and 20.
It's just weird to me that this deck is going as hard into card draw when it's marketing itself as a +1/+1 counter group hug deck.
Well, that's what the commander does on the tin.
Yeah, fair. I can't say I'm disappointed in it. I mean, I think it works with the deck and it works with the commander. It's just a bit of a curveball.
It's different than what you'd expect, which is kind of what I want out of all of the decks. I don't want them to be exactly what you'd think.
Oh, that's fair, because it's not like +1/+1 counter decks and group hug decks have been done to death. What I don't like in this deck is that there's a couple of cards that are just not good. In my opinion, there's just not enough support. Like Jolly Gerbils, for example, that's really wants to go all in on the gift side of things. I just don't think there are enough gift cards in order to get enough use out of this. It's just taking up space most of the time. Coveted Jewel, I'm not a big fan of. This thing just gets thrown around all the time to give people card advantage. And it's not like you have say on who gets the card advantage, just whoever happens to swing into you.
Yeah, but you have a pretty reliable team of flyers and a lot of creatures with vigilance, so it might not be hard to kick the jewel out and then hold on to it.
Yeah, but there's always the chance that somebody's going to take it away from you, and then it's no longer in your hands to defend it. It's in your opponent's. Now, you can make their thing bigger and evasive with our face commander, but that's just jumping through more hoops, in my opinion. Secret Rendezvous, again, is also one that I'm not the biggest fan of. It fits in the group hug dynamic, but 3 cards is a big ask for somebody because that positions somebody from being in the worst spot to being in a very good spot really quick without spending any mana. But overall, there aren't a whole lot of misses per se that I can say, oh, this card is terrible. What does strike me as odd is the absolute lack of proliferation sources in this deck. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's not a single one here.
I do not believe there is any, yes.
This is a +1/+1 counter deck, which generally needs at least some of them. And a lot of them are good on their own right just to put counters on, because things like Thrumming Bird, the ghost that does the same thing as Thrumming Bird, they can get counters so easily with Miss Bumbleflower and then just keep swinging in, proliferating the counters on themselves and everything else on the field, which makes them so good. And they're not in here for some reason. And I can't really, for the life of me, figure out why not.
Maybe they didn't want to go in the really obvious direction.
That's true, but we have subpar card draw payoffs here, like Hoofprints of the Stag, for example. This is a subpar card draw payoff. You could have easily swapped that out for a proliferation source and called it a day here and just made this deck without even changing the price that much because they're almost the same price. I don't know. But overall, as the impression of the deck, I don't know. I don't think this deck does enough in any particular direction, really. It's not all in on group hug. It's not all in on +1/+1 counters. It's got this weird card draw sub-theme that does work with the face commander, but doesn't synergize with the remainder of the... I mean, well, I guess it kind of does because Wizard class distributes counters. Chasm Skulker gets +1/+1 counters on itself as you draw cards, so there is some synergy here with the +1/+1 counter side of things, but not really the group hug aspect. This deck is going in a lot of directions, I think.
It is, and I think that's both to its flaw as a coherent deck, the way you'd build them, but also to its benefit as it's just going to be, just a little guy sitting there, and, nobody's going to want to mess with you because, like, oh, you're just handing out cards and doing your thing. And then while people aren't paying too much attention, suddenly you have like 7 counters on a Colonian Hydra and swing in with a 14/14 flying trample, and someone dies.
Well, that's true, and you do have 2 alternate win conditions with Triskaidekaphile and the Toad, which makes it so that, yeah, apparently this deck's most reliable way to win is either turning things sideways that you've empowered with the face commander, or you just draw cards, which wasn't even on the tin. If you were to look at the deck itself, it's like, oh, this +1/+1 counters group hug, you wouldn't really expect, I'm going to win this game through card advantage.
Yeah, that is the thing to mention. 20 Toad, it wins as an attack trigger. So, in the mid to late game, you've got your Reliquary Tower out, you've accrued a ridiculous amount of card advantage, you slap down this bad boy, immediately boot him up, and swing in.
Well, I mean, the question is, when upgrading this deck, do you want to just go all in, just pivot entirely into card draw and lean into that? Because it seems like that's the best thing that this deck has going for it.
I have absolutely no idea. I like the deck being just kind of a cute little guy.
I think this deck lacks a cohesive direction to go in personally, because I like my decks to have, a plan. This deck doesn't seem to have that. It just seems to have a bunch of loose ideas that there may be some internal synergy, but it doesn't come together in a way I like it to.
The deck is jazz.
How so?
It just sort of goes out there and plays in whatever direction feels right. Sometimes it's going to be putting out really big creatures that you give evasion and punch people in the face with, and you're a real threat. Sometimes it's going to be like, oh, yeah, I've just got a couple of little guys, don't hurt me, and just handing out cards. Everyone's like, well, I have the Rites of Flourishing out, Nagiraport Orrery, let's have fun, the game's fun. And then you phase out, and they kill each other, and you come back in, and you're like, hi, and then just beat one of them to death.
I mean, I can see that, but I'm lukewarm on this deck, and you seem to be more upbeat on this one and more optimistic on this one.
It's because Group Hug is inherently a reactive style of deck. You don't necessarily go in with the same kind of, or A+B=C win con kind of idea that a lot of other decks do.
I mean, we'll just have to see how this goes. I don't know how I'm going to tackle the upgrade for this, because, again, we're going into an archetype that I'm not a particularly big fan of.
I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll see what we can do if we can make this more cohesive.
We've got 3 more decks that are honestly probably a lot more straightforward.
We'll just have to see how those look. But for now, my initial impression on this one is that it's okay. It's fine. but I really can't give it a glowing endorsement here. I'm lukewarm on this one. I can see this being playable, but I think the game plan is lacking. I think this one may have difficulty closing out games in a cohesive way. I mean, you can always just turn things sideways with Miss Bumbleflower and just win games that way, or occasionally do so with the card advantage payoffs that we have here. But overall, this seems like it's a little too all over the place for my tastes. I can't speak for everybody, but I think maybe a lot of people are going to find it that way when they try to play this out of the box.
I think a lot of people are going to be drawn to Mrs. Bumbleflower as a commander because they like what she's bringing, and then that's not something that is for you. And then a bunch of people are going to immediately go to Mr. Foxglove because he's really cool, and sometimes he's going to attack and draw you 7.
Or just play an Eldrazi for free.
Ironically, don't do Eldrazi in that deck, because you don't get the cast trigger.
Yeah, but you still get like an 11/11.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, yeah, I guess that is it for the impressions of this particular deck. All right, but let us know what you think in the comments. Otherwise, this has been Grazzet.
And I'm Kaprak.
And as usual, folks, have a good one and stay safe.